Thank you everyone for inviting me here to give this talk today. I'm very excited to share with you some of the work I've been doing, we've been doing in Ethiopia. So it turns out the very first artifact I found 25 years ago was just across the Pyrenees in Totevel, in Arago Cave. And so I'm happy to be back finally after this length of time to talk a little bit more about some more artifacts that don't come from France or Spain, but come from Africa instead. These are I'm sure you're very well familiar with the early Stone Age. In fact, the symbol from CENIEH is the early Stone Age, right? So I don't have to talk too much detail introducing the topic, but I do want to mention the major sites in East Africa that have evidence for fossils of our ancestors and the earliest archaeological record. All these sites are in the Rift Valley in East Africa. Of course, I'm working on Gona now, but I've also spent a lot of time in Kubifora, in Kenya, and in Tanzania, Olduvai Gorge, and Laitola. These are, of course, some of the most famous sites in the world for the most extensive fossil and archaeological record of the very earliest evidence for human evolution. Gona itself, as I'm sure you're well aware, was made famous in the 90s through Dr. Seleshi's work, his dissertation work, uncovering and documenting the earliest stone tools that are known at these sites that we call East Gona, EG 10 and 12. And the importance of these, of course, was the dates. The dates were very firm, were dated through chronometric techniques, paleomagnetism, and potassium argon dating, as well as the descriptions of the artifacts themselves. Seleshi described the technology of the very earliest archaeological record. So that's how Gona really became known. And the publication, the Nature publication, is from 1997. At that point, Seleshi organized a multidisciplinary, multinational research team to continue work at Gona, because the work in the 90s was really just a few parts of Gona. If you look at this map here, the Gona research area really extends, it's more than 200 square kilometers of area of Badlands with outcrops just about everywhere, and much of it was not explored at all. So for the last, since Seleshi organized the project from 97, really got off the ground in 99. For the last 13, 14 years, the team of geologists, paleontologists, archaeologists of different fields, have explored extensively the area now. We know it very well. We have a lot of information, and literally hundreds of sites now are known from Gona. By the way, this is a group picture from just this past February, and you may recognize a few characters here. Say Mohammed. I know Matthew Duvall is over here somewhere. Can't sneak away. The field at Gona is very remote, like many of these locations in East Africa. It's in the Afar Depression, it's very hot and dry. We bring all our supplies with us. We're living in tents for a month every year when we're in the field, bringing fuel with us, food, getting water from the local town every day. It's well, I like it, but not everyone likes these conditions. Trying to find shade can be a challenge, not to mention just driving around. There are no roads, of course, so you try not to get stuck as best you can, but sometimes it happens. We cannot operate without a really experienced support staff, including drivers, mechanics, cooks, camp managers that really provide all the support we really need to work in these kinds of conditions. And especially important are the local people, the Afar people themselves, are participants in this project. There are local camel and goat and cow herders, but we have a group of about maybe a dozen or so that work with us every year, and they have great eyes. They can really spot fossils and artifacts that we're interested in, and they are a great help. So, over the last 14 years or so, since Seleshi expanded from those first few sites that are amongst the earliest in the world, or they are the earliest, we now, which really represents this red arrow here. If you look at this slide of human family tree from 7 million years ago to the present. The earliest stone tools date to 2.6 million years ago, and that's from Gona. But since then, all these arrows mark different archaeological sites at Gona that we've documented, some that we've excavated, some that we have not yet. But it just shows you the incredible time range that's represented at Gona. It's really the most extensive time range represented at any archaeological site in the world. Not only archaeology, but there have been hominid fossils found at Gona from at least 5 different time periods. And some of these have been published. I'll remind you of those later on. But some of them also have not yet been published, but will be soon. I'm going to focus really on maybe 3 time periods from Gona, because it highlights what we've been doing in, say, the last 5 years or so, kind of an update on what is current at Gona. And that includes more work at the very earliest levels, the 2.6 million year old sites. Another important time period is the early Acheulean, 1.6, 1.7 million years ago. I'll talk about what we were doing at that time. And also a little bit about in between, the time periods in between. We have several sites in between. This just emphasizes the importance, again, of Gona for understanding the very earliest Ounda, earliest Stone Age. If you look at the sites that are known in the world, older than 2 million, it's on this slide. And it's kind of broken up, the oldest at Gona and the more recent up to 2 million years ago. You'll note all these sites are in East Africa except for, you'll notice Ounda, which is Dr. Mohamed Zanuni's site in Algeria. But they're not there. There aren't very many. This is it. This is the total sample of archaeological sites that is known in the world older than 2 million. But Gona has half of them. So Gona is not only important for the earliest archaeology, but just for this extensive archaeological record. And very important for understanding with this earliest technology. Well, one way of updating you on what we're doing amongst the earliest sites is to show a little more detail on one particular site that we've been working on called Ounda Gona South 7, or OGS 7. This is a site that was found in 2000. I was lucky enough to find this site on the side of this hill in the Ounda Gona drainage. And we were very excited because we knew that this volcanic ash above the site is dated about 2.5, 2.6, so we knew it was amongst the earliest. So in 2000, we excavated the site. Our geologists took the dating samples. We found hundreds of artifacts in situ, in place. We found that the tuff up here, the volcanic ash, dated 2.53 million years ago, in combination with the paleomagnetic record, which shows the Gauss-Maruyama reversal, right at the site level, pretty much lateral to the site, firmly dated the site to 2.55 or so million years ago, equivalent to the age of the East Gona sites that CENIEH had excavated in the 90s. What was important about this site that we reported on several years ago now is that not only did it have early stone tools, which were very fresh, but also fossil animal bones at the site. So it's the earliest association of stones and bones together at a site. It still is the earliest. This is a piece plot of the site, shows the tight association. I don't know if you can see it, but the dark squares are bones. All the others are artifacts, stone artifacts, and they're really tightly spatially associated. And it's a very thin layer, about 10 centimeters or so. So in 2000, we closed the excavation and analyzed the material. We compared it also with the sites that CENIEH had excavated, the East Gona or Kata Gona, and noticed some slight differences in setting. The East Gona sites that CENIEH excavated are on the bank or on the floodplain of a bit large river, whereas the Ounda Gona 7 site is located right on the bank of a river or even a channel pond. Slightly different geographic setting. And from this site, this is some sampling of artifacts from the site to show the raw materials. They're all volcanic, of different kinds: trachyte, rhyolite, latite. Some that are very fine grained without phenocrysts. We call vitreous volcanic. They're very, very good to nab and sharp. And some of the work we did looking at the raw materials, we noticed a very interesting pattern, and this is work that was done with Dr. Dietrich Stout at Emory University, comparing the artifact raw materials with those from naturally occurring cobbles that are right next to the site. We compared the raw materials. It turns out that there was a big difference. So the hominids were choosing artifacts of different types of raw materials, very specific. So in the cobbles, in the stream beds, you have a lot of basalt and rhyolite, but the artifacts, in fact, were made mostly on trachyte and other fine-grained material that's very rare. So we made the argument that this is very good evidence for selectivity even amongst the very earliest stone tool makers. The pattern of raw material selection is a little bit different, though, at the Ounda Gona 7 site versus the Gona sites. At Gona, they really were, this is the green here, picking rhyolite and trachyte preferentially, where at OGS 7, it had to do more with the very, very fine-grained, what we call aphanitic or vitreous volcanic stones. Also, one other difference we noticed between East Gona and Ounda Gona is that at East Gona, the cores are largely unifacial, but not totally. Whereas at Ounda Gona, the cores were mainly bifacial and smaller. So there's some differences that we were wondering about. And just this illustrates the same point. If you look at the core typology or the napping method in use that we can see on these cores, there's a clear difference between the OGS 7 assemblage and the EG's assemblages. The question is, well, why? Well, another difference is a little bit dark, but one other thing we notice is that the size of cores and artifacts at the OGS 7 site are smaller. I can read that, but maximum dimensions are a little bit smaller, significantly smaller than East Gona assemblages. Some other photos of the East Gona artifacts that show this primarily unifacial flaking, but also there's also bifacial flaking represented, multifacial flaking. So it's not simply unifacial. Versus the OGS 7 cores from the 2000 excavation, which is mostly bifacial, multifacial, and smaller. Not only that, we had flakes, large flakes that were then flaked also. Well, these differences were interesting to us, and we were wondering what the reason for them are. Could be a lot of factors involved, including the cobbles themselves. The original source could be different sizes. That could be really a big difference here. It could be different ecological settings, represented different activities, or even different technologies. One wonder whether maybe there are different even hominids making these different stone tools. Well, part of the problem with trying to explain these differences is that the original excavation is so small. It's only 2.5 square meters. I mean, you look at this table here, it wasn't even as big as this table. Very small area. And our sample size is also small, only 7 cores. So it's a bit of a problem with the sampling. So we knew that we needed to expand our sample of OGS 7, and over the years we would go back to the site and ponder the hillside up above us, because if you wanted to get in there, you needed to take the whole hill down. A lot of work. But we did occasionally scrape off the top of the outcrop to try to lessen our load in the future, but of course things keep falling down. So eventually, in 2010, we made the commitment to extend the excavation. And so we did put in several days of work into clearing the overburden above the site. We'd love to have a bulldozer, but just cannot get them there, so we have to do it by pick and shovel. and a lot of labor, and that's where we get our exercise every year. Well, so this is 3 years ago. We exposed the original excavation and found this line of cobbles, which we left in 2000. So 13 years ago, we left these cobbles in the back of the wall. They're still there, fortunately. So we identified the original floor. We identified the original grid and all that. We were able to reconstruct it. What was interesting to some extent is that you see this very narrow band of excavated floor. It's almost like this table were sliced in half. Well, over 10 years, 50 centimeters of outcrop had been eroded away. So it actually gives us a good idea as to how much erosion there is at Gona anyways, in this badland environment. About 5 centimeters every year is being lost, which is, I think that's a lot. It's very fast. It also gives you important information to how often you should recheck for refreshing fossils and artifacts. In fact, at Gona, we get that impression every year. It looks different just about every year we go back from the previous year. So it really does help to go revisit these places every year. So anyways, we excavated back into the outcrop, and of course we found more because that's what, every suggestion was there'd be more there. Hundreds more artifacts. This is Excavation Progress. More fossil bone of not bad condition, but still not pristine. We ended up tripling the size, 6 square meters to 2.5 of the excavation, so we got a much bigger area. Here's compare the 2000 excavation area here with our 2010 excavation. We've widened it up a lot more. And some of the original observations still hold. The fossil bones and the artifacts still very tightly spatially associated. It's kind of interesting, this little gap in the middle here, not sure why exactly, and if you see, there's obviously will be more. If we were to expand the excavation further into the hill, we would certainly find more. If you look at the cross section below here, one thing we learned in the second round is that it looks like there's repeated occupation, maybe 2 different levels of discard of artifacts and fossils. But we didn't really know that before. So since the excavation 3 years ago, we've been looking in more detail at the new artifacts. This is our colleague Diedrich Stout at Emory University doing some laser scanning of the artifacts using equipment that I know that you have here at CENIEH. Some of the new things we found included hammerstones. They're almost certainly hammerstones. There's pitting on the ends of these cobbles, one made of basalt, one made of trachyte, just 2 different views of the same stones. They're very small. Just look at the metrics there. That's a very small hammerstone. Several more cores were found, which is important for us to understand the technology represented here. This is what we call maybe a single platform core with a split cobble that flakes are taken off that ventral surface. This is a small bifacial, mostly bifacial core. You see the size of my fingers. The core is tiny and yet very exhaustively flaked. So some of the observations we had from 2000 were confirmed with the new excavation, including the size. But some things we learned some new things. There were some more core forms that we found in 2010 that were not present in the original excavation. So it expanded the variability that you can see in the technology. And I won't go into too much detail about this slide, but this sort of illustrates the point. And again, with mapping method, it shows again the difference between OGS 7, which is in the red here, versus the East Gona sites. But with our new excavations, it does also show that the overlap. It's not like there's East Gona sites are all unifacial, and Ounda Gona sites are all bifacial. There's definitely technological overlap between the two.